A devotional for March 13, and this is taken from My Utmost for His Highest by Oswald Chambers. The title for today's devotion is God's Total Surrender to Us. If you would like to use Oswald Chambers' devotionals for your daily use, you can go to utmost.org. And in addition to the daily devotionals, which are very brief, the ones that are printed there, there's also a reading through the scripture in a year link for each day. So today is God's total surrender to us. For God so loved the world that he gave. John 3:16. Salvation does not mean merely deliverance from sin or the experience of personal holiness. The salvation which comes from God means being completely delivered from myself and being placed into perfect union with him. When I think of my salvation experience, I think of being delivered from sin and gaining personal holiness. But salvation is so much more. It means that the Spirit of God has brought me into intimate contact with the true person of God himself. And as I am caught up into the total surrender to God, I become thrilled with something infinitely greater than myself. To say that we are called to preach holiness or sanctification is to miss the main point. We are called to proclaim Jesus Christ. See 1 Corinthians 2, verse 2. The fact that he saves from sin and makes us holy is actually part of the effect of his wonderful and total surrender to us. If we are truly surrendered, we will never be aware of our own efforts to remain surrendered. Our entire life will be consumed with the one to whom we surrender. Beware of talking about surrender if you know nothing about it. In fact, you will never know anything about it until you understand that John 3:16 means that God completely and absolutely gave himself to us. In our surrender, we must give ourselves to God in the same way he gave himself for us, totally, unconditionally, and without reservation. The consequences and circumstances resulting from our surrender will never even enter our mind because our life will be totally consumed with him. And if you remember the devotion from the day before, from March 12th, which was about total surrender, that's the point that we normally get stuck on. That's the point where we start to talk to others and say, you should surrender, you should surrender. And now in March 13, Oswald Chambers' devotional here refocuses that God's total surrender was to us. And if we keep that in mind, if we have that perspective, our surrender becomes that much simpler. Because very often what we do when we think about our own surrender, or the ways that we may give something up or give something over to God, we're still holding on to that clutch within us that says, I still want things my way. I still want things to be within my control as I see it. And so very often we don't understand what a picture of total surrender looks like. And so we kind of measure ourselves according to what others are doing. Well, I'm surrendering more than that person, therefore I'm probably a little better off. Or I'm not surrendering as much as that person, maybe that's an area that I need to work on. What we often fail to consider is that God's total surrender was to us. And our inherent brokenness, our original sin, comes in the fact that we wanted to assert our independence, which means that we wanted to step out of our dependence on God. So even if you go back to Adam and Eve, you're looking at a situation where Adam and Eve had to make an assertion that they maybe knew better than what God had in mind for them. And that's where we get hung up in our failure to surrender. And what we forget is that original sin and that original brokenness, that inherent peace that's within us, that we can't do this on our own anymore, we still hold on to that and we still cling to that tightly. We want to do things our way. We have difficulty trusting God when things are difficult. And it doesn't matter how good we get at following God, if we don't surrender, it's all pointless. And that's where God's total surrender came to us. We rebelled. We asserted our independence. We decided we didn't want to be dependent on God. And immediately we were separated, and there was nothing that could be done on our own end in order to do that until God's total surrender to us, giving himself up fully through the person of Jesus Christ, his Son, in order to bring us back into right relationship with Him. So stop thinking first about your surrender if you get stuck on that point, but instead focus on God's surrender to us, God's desire to completely pour Himself out in the life, death, ultimate resurrection, and ascension of Jesus Christ, so that we could be in right relationship. God has already given us the example of what total surrender looks like. And if we spend more time dwelling on that, maybe our surrender to God will begin to flow more naturally as we move into a place of more sanctification and more trust, and just this sense of peace and presence of what has already been accomplished.